I live in the United States of America, and if some of you have watched my YouTube channel, I live in the state of Virginia. Now, the state I live in, according to the United States polls, this is a Democrat state, according to voter way, I guess you can say, from what they show from the polls and results and all that stuff. But the vote that happened in 2021 or something like that with the governor, we have a governor named Governor Youngkin, who won in, I think it's believed to be called the margin of error, and shockingly enough, he won the election. And in my heart, I was glad that he was a Republican that won the election. But I did not vote in that election, though I was peer pressured by family members to do so in a degree of manner. But I chose not to. And I have chosen to not register myself as a registered voter. Even if I get tempted to, I don't believe that I think they would accept my vote, or even if, say, family tempts me again and they force me to go, I don't believe that they will even let me in the registration building because my ID is not registered as a voter. Because this is why I choose not to be. It isn't because Andrew Tyner said so, because in good conscience he said from a video that he cannot vote. And it made me wonder on and on, like, why should we not vote? And I've told a brother in the Lord this over the phone and even over text. The reason why we as disciples of Jesus should not vote is because God has already chosen the leader for us. Now, in the 2020 elections, I was severely peer pressured to vote in that election. And obviously, I will reveal who I voted for. I voted for the Independent Party. Now, why is that? Because at that time, I started to come into the truth of Christ, even though that has nothing to do with the topic. But I was peer pressured because pretty much all of my family voted Republican. But the problem is that they always vote Republican, and that's something that a family member pointed out in a certain rebukeness. And I just thought to myself, is that if you want to choose Republican or vote Republican, and you have a moral background, then obviously that is your individual choice. Because to a voter that is a Christian, if you're going to vote for anybody, you're going to vote Republican, because Republicans stand up for moral values. But if you stand up for an antichrist or a demonic agenda, or as the Republicans and Republican supporters call woke, then you're going to be a Democrat or a liberal voter supporter. But I chose to pick independent was because I was peer pressured to vote severely. And at that time, there was a deception around the world thinking, or in America, that you had to vote. You had to vote because they wanted Trump out of office. That was the agenda of what many people wanted. And the way how Trump ran office during the pandemic, and in some cases God allowed Democrats and news organizations try to make Trump look bad and all that stuff. And there are personal things that Trump did that are even not okay in the eyes of God. That in some cases, Trump himself is the reason why he's not in office right now. But in 2020, when the election happened, there are rumors that there was election interference or election fraud. Now, full disclaimer, I am not saying that the vote in 2020, the presidential election, was fraudulent. I am not saying that. But what I am saying, from the wisdom that God has given me, I'm going to give a hypothetical description of, say, the election interference did happen and the Democrats did say, did election interference so that they can get Trump out of office, so that they can pass on their demonic Antichrist agenda. Not the woke agenda, but the Antichrist agenda. I want to read a verse that is in Genesis chapter 50, I'm not going to read the verse, but I'm going to start reading at the titled verse called Joseph's reassures his brothers. When Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said, "What if Joseph holds a grudge against us and pays us back for all the wrongs we did to him?" So they sent word to Joseph saying, "Your father left these instructions before he died. This is what you are to say to Joseph. I ask you to forgive your brother's sins and the wrongs they've committed in treating you so badly. Now please forgive the sins of the servants of the God of your father." When their message came to him, Joseph wept. His brothers came then and threw themselves down before him. "We are your slaves," they said. But Joseph said to them, "Don't be afraid. Am I in the place of God? You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. So then don't be afraid. I will provide for you and your children." And he reassured them that spoke kindly to them. So, though this verse has if someone who didn't understand what I'm talking about, this makes no sense. But to anyone who has an ear to hear, I'm going to reveal to you what I am talking about. So, say hypothetically, there was election interference. What the Democrats did that was evil and illegal to interfere in the election, God intended for good, because, say, hypothetically, if Trump were to come back in office and then, say, America into a degree way repents and finds God again, or America gets back in shape again through the Republican Party, through the president, then God can do that. But people unfortunately think that by their own hand that they can get a president out of the office. Now, God uses voters to God uses voters to make people presidents, but it's not by the single hand of a man or a woman that chooses the next president or leader. It is God himself that decides this, not us, infallibly. It is through God that he allows us to choose who the next leader is. Now, what do I mean by that? I'm going to get to that in a minute, but I'm going to continue on in the book of Daniel, in parts of the book of Daniel that I'm going to read. If I can find it, just very quickly. Now, this is what was said in Daniel chapter 2, verse 20 through 23. "Praise to be the name of God forever and ever. Wisdom and power are his. He changes times and seasons. He deposes kings and raises up others. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to the discerning. He reveals deep and hidden things, that he knows what lies in darkness, and light dwells with him. I thank and praise you, God of my ancestors. You have given me wisdom and power. You have made known to me what we asked of you. You have made known to us the dream of the king. Did you hear that, guys? He said in his praise, he changes times and seasons. He deposes kings and raises up others. He will take a leadership from a king and put another one in power. It is not by single-handedly a person, but it is God that allows things to happen. God, through a nation, through people to a degree, God allows people to choose, obviously, but it is God infallibly and only that he chooses at his pleasure and as his being, that God decides the next leader, the next president, the next communist, dictator, whatever. He chooses that. He decides this, not us only. And I'm going to give you an evidence in the Bible, what is written down, and this will take a minute, but I'm going to read in Daniel chapter 4, verses 28, verse 37, and if you want to read it for yourself, you can, but I'm going to read. All this happened to King Nebuchadnezzar. Now, before I continue on, the prophet Daniel King Nebuchadnezzar had a dream of a tree that scattered over, like its branches scattered the whole earth, and a voice called in heaven saying, cut down that tree. And long story short, the dew of heaven would be upon the tree stump for 7 times, meaning 7 years. And eventually this was fulfilled at this time to King Nebuchadnezzar. 12 months later, as the king was walking on the roof of royal place of Babylon, he said, is this not the great Babylon I have built as the royal residence by my mighty power and for the glory of my majesty? Even as the words were on his lips, a voice came from heaven. This is what is decreed for you, King Nebuchadnezzar. Your royal authority has been taken away from you. You will be driven away from people and will live with the wild animals. You will eat grass like the ox. 7 times will pass by for you until you acknowledge that the Most High is sovereign over all kingdoms on earth and gives them to anyone he wishes. Immediately, what had been said about Nebuchadnezzar was fulfilled. He was driven away from people and ate the grass like the ox. His body was drenched with the dew of heaven until his hair grew like the feathers of an eagle and his nails like the claws of a bird. At the end of that time, which was the 7 years, I, Nebuchadnezzar, raised my eyes towards heaven, and my sanity was restored. Then I praised the Most High. I honor and glorified him who lives forever. His dominion is an eternal dominion. His kingdom endures from generation to generation. All the people of the earth are regarded as nothing. He does as he please with the powers of heaven and the people of the earth. No one can hold back his hand or say to him, what have you done? At the time of that same time that my sanity was restored, my honor and splendor were returned to me for the glory of my kingdom. My advisors and nobles sought me out, and I was restored to my throne and became even greater than before. Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and exalt and glorify the kingdom of heaven, because everything he does is right. All his ways are just, and those who walk in pride he is able to humble. Even Nebuchadnezzar himself proclaimed that God is who he is and he decides what he can do. So say for Trump example, which this has been broadly been shown, I want to tell you guys something. Trump can't say to himself, well, I won the election. Well, here's the thing. Donald Trump may say that all he wants, and he may know things that what many don't. But one thing that most of this world rejects is that God has power that we don't know. God, through the Democrats, through that situation, say hypothetically, Joe Biden won the election because God allowed that election to result to be the way it is. And say if there was interference, or say if there was no interference, God allowed the election results to turn out the way it was because God allowed it. He has power. We individually do not have power. It's Jesus Christ that has power. Power that we don't understand. In my heart, I hope Trump wins. But also at the same time, if God allows Kamala Harris to win office, here's the thing. We have to be in content. Because regardless if Trump or Kamala Harris or a Republican or a Democrat or a man of God or a communist, we have to be in content. Because we have to recognize other countries and nations of this earth that God instituted. But I'm going to get to that a little later. So I am going to go to the book of John. It's in chapter 19. And I'm going to read from the first of chapter 19, verse 1 through I'm going to read to chapter 12. Then Pilate took Jesus and had him flogged. The soldiers twisted together crowns of thorns and put it on his head. They clothed him in a purple robe and went up to him again and said, "Hail, King of the Jews," and spat on him in the face. Once more Pilate came out and said to the Jews gathered there, "Look, I am bringing him out to you to let you know that I find no basis for a charge against him." When Jesus came out wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe, Pilate said to them, "Here is the man." As soon as the chief priests and their officials saw him, they shouted, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" But Pilate answered, "You take him and crucify him. As for me, I find no basis for a charge against him." The Jewish leaders insisted, "We have a law, and according to that law he must die because he claimed to be the Son of God." When Pilate heard this, he was even more afraid, and he went back inside the inside the palace. "Where do you come from?" he asked Jesus, but Jesus gave him no answer. "Do you refuse to speak to me?" Pilate said. "Don't you realize I have the power either to free you or to crucify you?" Jesus answered, "You would have no power over me if it were not given to you from above. Therefore, the one who handed me over to you is guilty of a greater sin." From then on, Pilate tried to set Jesus free, but the Jewish leaders kept shouting, "If you let this man go, you are no friend of Caesar. Anyone who claims to be king opposes Caesar." The thing is what many even reject, even in this verse, what Jesus said, "You would have no power over me if it were not given to you from above." The one who gives authority and power to anyone has been given, or that God gives, that is above, that God gives to you. So just to give a brief small story of something that happened at my job, or stuff that has happened at my job, there have been times where I've wanted to tell this employee of mine that's the same rank management as I am, that I literally wanted to tell him was, dude, do you know and realize that God gave you this position? And the thing is, guys, is that same position was given to me. Is I chose that position because I thought, well, not only could I make more money from this, but I thought, why not try? Because, I just wanted to give the management thing a try. And there have been many mistakes that I have learned of being a manager, to major degrees, to I will admit and honestly admit that management is not easy. But if you choose that, more responsibility is upon your shoulders. But like I said, God has chosen that. But it is also someone's choice, if they want to not be a leader or a management or whatever. But God does have the power to put you in a position of power. And I'm going to read to some degree of that right here in Romans chapter 13, and I'm basically just going to if you just give me a minute, read to verse basically verse 1 of chapter 13 to 7. Let everyone be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except that which God has established. The authorities that exist have been established by God. Consequently, whoever rebels against the authority is rebelling against what God has instituted, and those who do so will bring judgment on themselves. For rulers hold no terror for those who do right, but for those who do wrong. Do you want to be free from fear of the one in authority? Then do what is right, and you will be commended. For the one in authority is God's servant for your good. But if you do wrong, be afraid, for rulers do not bear the sword for no reason. They are God's servants, agents of wrath, to bring punishment on the wrongdoers. Therefore, it is necessary to submit to the authorities, not only because of possible punishment, but also a matter of consequence. This is also why you pay taxes, for the authorities are God's servants, who give their full time to governing. Give to everyone that you owe them. If you owe tax, pay taxes. If revenue, then revenue. If respect, then respect. If honor, then honor. Now, to some degree, if Antichrist supporting politicians try to silence your voice by using laws that say you can't speak against homosexuality, you can't speak against pedophilia or sexually immoral things, you can't speak up against abortions, or you can't speak up anything that is of the devil. You can't speak. You basically, God has given you a right to speak. But now, if you're speaking against the police, however, in such disrespect that you hate the police just because they're the police, then, like Paul said, you're gonna have the punishment of the law through God, or God through the law against you, because you are breaking the law of the nation and state you're in. And I'm just gonna close my Bible, obviously, but so that begs the question of all of what I've told in this very long video. Who appoints leaders? Is it us, or is it God? From all the verses that I have told you, even to an extent of pulling what the church would do, It is God, Jesus Christ, who decides who the next leader, the next president, the next prime minister, the next whoever position he chooses and decides. Now, through situations, God can do this. Through voting, he can do this. Through situations like I just said, he decides who the next president or the next voter is. But if you are a man of God, truly a man of God or a woman of God, I would highly encourage you not to vote, because our king, no matter what nation we live in, is Jesus Christ. His kingdom is unshakable. Unlike America I live in is shakeable. Unlike Japan is shakeable. Unlike the old parts of Mexico that got raided by America or invaded, or however it ended up being, God allowed that to happen in America. Or when the Roman Empire collapsed, God allowed that nation to be crumbled. Just like how, like when Babylon invaded Judea and Jerusalem, God allowed that because that was his wrath. And you know how the word of the Lord spoke through Jeremiah? And at one point, as I was speaking, I was then reminded that of what Paul said was, to some degree, whether Paul knew it or not, is a reference to what Jeremiah actually said that was from the word of God, the word of the Lord. You know how God, the word of the Lord said, my servant Babylon. God's servants, whether they reject him or not, are the nation's leaders. And to this degree, we must be God's servants. Even positions that we are in at our jobs or whatever, God is our servant. Even, yes, we are boss, like we are servants of our bosses. But the higher up you go, the servant that, or the person that you serve is God. Whether you reject him or not, he is your servant. And God will use that nation to bring wrath or to bring punishment or discipline against another nation or even within itself. Like in 2020, we saw many riots and protests, even way after the George Floyd riots and protests that happened after his death. There are so many things, guys, that that even many people decided to go full out apocalyptic mode, where you even saw a group of people in Louisville, I believe, in Kentucky, or I don't remember what state it is. Literally a group of men who had assault rifles, where there was supposedly a shooting. They all got into a military position, getting ready to shoot down the an activist or whoever. And when I saw the video of this, I was kind of shocked and amazed. I was like, that is crazy to see that even that men who are in some degree supporting an antichrist agenda, they are in military position poses that they are ready to kill anyone who is gonna murder the crowd. But I do want to say, you guys, is that truly, no matter what anyone says, Jesus Christ decides who the next president, the next leader is. And I know that this video is pretty much 30 minutes long to explain this, but I have to tell in context, while God guides me to tell you this, is because people will reject the idea that, well, no, God doesn't decide and blah, 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 and they will get very rude about this, because when I've spoken this, I've gotten into bad discussions to where even family members get very agitated when I talk about this, is because even just anyone in general wants to say to themselves that I myself got that president, that Republican president in office, and I could take pride in that. No. You have no power unless God gives you power. Now, I will say, if America in time requires you to vote, then by God's standards, you are required to vote by law. Because I would have to too if I were in America, and to some degree, in my opinion, it would be an interesting thing to see requirement to vote. But to some degree, I have to rebuke my own flesh and mind for that, because it's not out of requirement that we'll know what people or what we the people think. It's what God says is what matters, not what we the people think. It's what Jesus thinks that matters. And if we submit to him, then our country, or any country that submits to God, will be in success. Though they may have trials and tribulations, but if you endure with God, you will overcome. But if you follow after Antichrist agendas or demonic agendas, God will hand over your nation to Satan and his deceptions and his ungodly consequences that's going to happen to him. Don't let your nation end in fire, more than just nukes being fired upon your nation. So, what I'm going to ask you is your hope in voting for Trump or Kamala Harris, or is your hope in Jesus Christ, where your hope must be set on? May Jesus Christ bless you. And one more thing I want to add is, if you want to vote, then go and vote. And if God commands you in spirit and in truth to vote, then do so. Follow that commandment. But if you are told by God not to vote, then you better not vote. But if you choose to vote, then that is your choice. Just know that Jesus Christ is Lord always, and that what Jesus Christ says matters more than what others are trying to get you to do. May Jesus bless you.